I'm going to go ahead and wait a couple more minutes for folks to arrive, and then we'll get started. Okay, Desiree, are we ready?
Yes, Mr. Chair, your recording is started.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on state and local task forces during the time of COVID-19. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call.
Okay. Miss Allard.
Here.
Mr. Constant. Mr.
He
Dunbar.
may not be able to attend.
Okay. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Perfect. Miss Kennedy.
Here.
Miss LaFrance. Miss LaFrance, are you there? You might be muted. We'll come back to her. Mr. Presberdia. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Miss Salatel.
She will be joining us late.
Okay, and I do see Miss LaFrance in the attendee list.
I'm here, Desiree.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Today begins the first of several meetings to inform our COVID-19 response. Shortly after the various stay-at-home and hunker-down orders were issued, both the mayor and governor formed local and state task forces to explore economic mitigation strategies. These groups have been hard at work trying to provide the best economic advice possible to the mayor, governor, legislature, and assembly. So I'm very pleased and honored to have the co-chairs of the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force join us today. That is Bill Popp, with the president and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, as well as Julie Sapi, the president and CEO of Visit Anchorage. For the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team, both Senator Mark Begich and Governor Sean Parnell were invited. I'm pleased that we have Senator Begich to join us. Unfortunately, Governor Parnell could not join us today. So a brief overview of the agenda. So once I am done, I'm going to turn it over to the co-chairs of the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force, and they will have a presentation. And then after that, we will go to the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team, and Senator Begich will walk us through the work that they did. I don't think Senator Begich has a presentation per se, but there are documents that we can share on the screen for the members to review the work that was done. And I believe that was also forwarded to all of the members last week or so. And then after those two presentations, which I have queued up roughly an hour for each, but they may or may not take that long, an hour and discussion. After that, we'll spend a little bit of time delving into any specific requests that the assembly members want, specifically the Mayor's Economic Relief Task Force to consider. and then we will wrap up. So with that, let's go ahead and cue up the presentation for the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force and turn it over to Bill Popp and Julie Sape.
Can't hear you, Bill.
Sorry about that. You'd think we would learn this by now. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of myself, my co-chair, Julie Sape, thank you for having us here today. We are pleased to have this opportunity to brief you on the pretty busy period of time that we've been involved in as co-chairs and with our fellow members of the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force. Today, we'd like to walk you through both a little bit of history on the task force, who we are, how we are made up, as well as many of the recommendations that we have made at different levels of government and to the community. And then maybe close our presentation with a look to the future in terms of some of the topics that are starting to, in general terms, make their way into our conversations at the Economic Resiliency Task Force. My co-chair, Julie Sape, and I will be trading off different sections of this presentation today. I'm going to kick things off. Forgive me, I don't see the presentation in my screen, but I just want to verify that it is being seen by the members of the Assembly or that they are following along. Aha, there we go. And I'm not sure if I'm able to control the advancement of the slides, so I'm going to I think yeah, it looks like I don't, so I would request that we go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the first 9 weeks of the ERTF, which was formed at 9 a.m. on March 16th, the call came out at about 6:30 that morning asking that the task force be formed, working with the administration and my co-chair, Julie Sape. We pulled this together, and it has evolved over this 9-week period to now represent 24 members of the business organizations, nonprofits, and small businesses from across Anchorage. And I am very serious about that too. We have representation from Girdwood, from Eagle River, and from all parts of Anchorage in regards to the membership of the ERTF. We have significant staff support for the ERTF. Even though this is all a volunteer effort, there is contributions of staff to support this work in terms of the different working groups, which we'll describe in a moment, as well as the main body and the communications effort. And this staff is being provided by the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. I believe we have 3 to 4 team members, depending on the day of the week, involved out of our 6 team members supporting the ERTF, as well as team members from the municipality of Anchorage and the Anchorage Community Land Trust. Next slide, please.
And actually, Bill, if I could just interrupt you really quick. So I think we might have some members of the public attending. So this presentation is on the Assembly website. If you want to go to muni.org, the Assembly website, and then there's a work sessions page on that website. You can find that this presentation there. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in our first couple of meetings, we had to figure out just exactly why we were gathered together and what our purpose was. And the ERTF mission that you see before you is what evolved from that. We understand that we had immediacy in this, which is definitely represented at the beginning of this statement, to identify and propose immediate actions to local, state, and federal policymakers to mitigate the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to Anchorage employers, employees, and nonprofits. We also know that we are evolving into future work to identify post-COVID strategies to build economic resilience and to improve future response capacity, and to be a credible and accessible source of information and resources for the Anchorage business and workforce sectors. So we have a lot of audiences that we are trying to work for, and stakeholders that we are trying to represent in the work that we are doing. So at this point, I'll hand off to my co-chair, Julie Sape.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And thank you also to the Assembly for organizing this work session and wanting to hear what we've been up to. So as Bill said, and you can advance to the next slide, Bill mentioned that there's 24 members of the ERTF. That's kind of what we consider the full body of the task force. But within that task force, we've got many working groups that are working And I don't think Bill and I even know the full depth of how many people are involved. I would say each of these working groups have anywhere from, say, 8 to 15 or 20 people who are participating on a weekly basis in the work at this level. So not only are we well represented at the full body level, but through the work groups, we are really representing every corner of Anchorage's economy, I believe. So the 7 working groups that we've got identified right now who are very busy, we've got local policy, and that's being chaired by Monica Emerton. Our state policy group, Bruce Bustamante is chairing that, and at the federal policy level, we've got Ethan Tyler. These groups work very closely with their respective governmental body and make appropriate recommendations, policy suggestions at those different levels of government. And then we've got what we call our programs and tactics. We've got 2 work groups there. Business programs and tactics. This is our John group, John Bittner and Jonathan White. And then workforce programs and tactics, which is Sylvia Villamides and Nicole Nelson, who are co-chairing that. These are really kind of on the ground. What do businesses, what do workers need right now? And while they're not necessarily policy groups, a lot of what they are learning from their respective groups trickle up to the different levels of policy. So, so they're very involved in informing some of our other committees and making recommendations for those policy group committees. We also have a brand new working group, which is the Minority Disadvantaged Business Owners or Business and Workforce Group with Heather McAlpine and Jasmine Smith. This is something that Chair Rivera brought to us, and it was a good addition to our group, and they're just getting started. And then we've got what we call our communications team. Katie Doherty and Emily Cohn are co-chairing this. This is a group that does more work than I can describe. They keep all of the other groups' policies. They help us communicate what's happening in the business community, what's happening with the different stimulus and relief funds, how you can access those. They've developed a website, they've developed a texting platform, and Bill will talk about some of those in a bit. And they have a broad spread membership of the communications group too, across all the different organizations represented on the ERTF where appropriate. So you can move on to the next slide. So what have we learned in the last 8 weeks? We've learned a lot. First is that our business and nonprofit community was unprepared for such a broad disruption. I don't think that that's a surprise to anybody. I don't think there's probably a business community across the nation that was prepared. However, I feel very confident that the folks who are rising to meet the situation are doing so in great fashion. We've got, as Bill said, a really good group working on just about every group. So huge cash crunch has affected broad swaths of businesses and nonprofit organizations. Again, I'm sure that's not news to anybody. But this is one of the areas that comes up across all groups, is the need to get any funding available quickly out to both workers as well as businesses. That's really where the immediate needs are, is just helping bridge a gap so that these businesses can stay with us for several more months or a year. Coordination of messaging, particularly with key information on how to access those funds, was a big gap, and we're working very hard, that communications team, to fill that. Confusion. So I think these last 4 bullets really can be combined into one. There's messaging, confusion on the big issues for both businesses and workforce, rapidly unfolding relief efforts, very challenging because of the scale of the disaster, and then the rapid speed with which information is changing, whether it's information on the virus or information on the programs available and assistance available. Next slide. So Bill is gonna, sorry Bill, I keep calling you Bruce. Bill is going to talk about the shared recommendation, or each of the individual policy group recommendations. However, there's several areas where it really crossed all of our groups, whether it was a programs group or a policy group. These were some of the big issues that came up early and came up often. First was the need for accessible assistance programs at all levels of government. And this group has been very, very clear and aggressive in making sure that we communicate clearly to those agencies providing assistance that grants, not loans, is really what is needed by our business community now. We've also been very clear that we need to be inclusive of nonprofits and sole proprietors. I think you're all aware in Alaska, nonprofits are a significant portion of our business community. And it seems that in a lot of the legislation and in a lot of the programs available, nonprofits, especially early on, were left off of lists. And then I talked about the need for rapid deployment of funds. That too has bubbled up from every single work group, that things need to be simple and rapid. And so those are some commonalities. Other commonalities, whatever level of government we've been working at, is recommendations to waive or defer business fees and taxes wherever it's allowable. That certainly has bubbled up over and over and over again, and we've gotten very good response from those recommendations. The need to support the workforce. With the rapid unemployment, we need to make sure that workforce who have been laid off, furloughed, have access to funds so that they can keep paying their bills, keep supporting their families. Clear guidelines for businesses and customers. And this, again, this really came from our business programs and tactics group. Really need to provide good, clear education, signage, information, consistent information for businesses on how they can operate to keep themselves and their customers safe. And then highlighting and supporting community programs, for example, all of the work and effort around ensuring that customers keep supporting restaurants even when dine-in was closed. Those type of community programs, whether it's for charitable activities or supporting the business community in a new way, were very important to all groups to make sure that we're doing messaging to our residents and also to businesses on how they can pivot and continue operating and at least getting some revenue in the door. Next slide. And it looks like we go back to Bill here.
Thanks, Julie. So now I'll dive into some of the specific recommendations that we haven't already covered that have come out of our different working groups and in terms of policy recommendations to the three levels of government. Our first working group, local government, has been providing a lot of different recommendations, trying to advise the administration on a number of different points. The providing clarity for the issue of what is an essential versus a non-essential worker and clear guidelines by industry sector for reopening. Those were some of the early, these are some of the early recommendations that we were forwarding to the administration, as there were a lot of questions in the business community on those points. Equal access to broadband to bridge the digital divide. Many parts of our community, broadband adoption, broadband availability can be challenges for businesses and for workers. And we definitely felt strongly that in this day and age of working from home and from the inability to go to different government offices to seek the information that you need, that broadband has become a critical element in the COVID response, as well as the maintaining of our existing economy as such as it is right now in its current circumstances. Also providing informational resources in multiple languages. That was an early recommendation from the local government working group, recognizing that we have a broad and diverse business community and workforce in our city that speak many languages and with English as a second language. We made recommendations in regards to the municipality waiving costs for nonprofits until federal funds become available, which is a significant challenge in that a lot of number of nonprofits are dealing with some significant issues in terms of accessing those funds. And another element that the municipality exempts stimulus checks from garnishment. That, while it may serve an immediate purpose for municipal government, is counter to the purpose of the stimulus funds in getting cash into the economy and helping to carry people through this very difficult time. And that the municipality act to avoid anticipated eviction tsunami. Those were words that came right out of our group, as housing protections expire. Rent relief pilot projects was one recommendation in terms of how do we address this. And we've already seen the $1 million fund that with the agreement of the Assembly, the administration has implemented for rental and housing assistance that is out there now doing good work in our community. But this still looms as a fairly significant issue as we see the amped up unemployment benefits run out at the end of July. Next slide, please. State government recommendations. One of the major recommendations is the recommendation that the state consider using the U.S. Chamber's National Return to Work Plan when it comes to questions of insurance and privacy. Liability issues, privacy issues are going to be a real tricky area in the coming months and potentially years as we continue to deal with this pandemic. Waiving commercial use permits and per person fees on public lands for the remainder of 2020. This would be, once again, a way to reduce the cost of doing business for a number of businesses that are already being significantly stressed, in particular in the tourism sector, and that it recognizes clearly that these businesses are likely not even going to be able to use these permits to any significant degree to equate to their full financial value. And then the Alaska Co-op Development Center to work with cottage industries to allow for online sales and allow cooperative takeover of retiring cottage industry businesses. This is a rather unique one. It's a niche piece of this, but this is an opportunity for would-be entrepreneurs to get into the cottage industry sector, in particular in the food areas, prepared foods, as well as processed foods. And this we felt would be just an additional way to help boost up the economy. And then that the state of Alaska create a single, easy to navigate job portal referenced by region, job category, and skill sets. This hasn't been acted on yet, but we still think it is an important recommendation as we are going to have tens of thousands of displaced workers potentially this year across the state, and particularly here in Anchorage. And they're going to have enough challenges without it being hard to be able to search for job opportunities that will be limited in scope as the year progresses. Next slide, please.
Actually, before we move on to the next slide, I think we have a question from Ms. LaFrance.
Question, Bill, or Mr. Pop, on the U.S. Chamber's National Return to Work Plan.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is that, and what is, in terms of questions of insurance and privacy, what does that mean?
It's a series of recommendations that were put together by the through the chair. It's a series of recommendations put together by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that was a leading thought leader in how to plan for getting business back to work, in terms of getting workers back to work, et cetera. Insurance is more focused, if memory serves, forgive me, I haven't looked at this document in a while, though I probably need to be dusting it off since we appear to be reopening fairly quickly to make sure I'm back up to speed. But and Julie may jump in and help me with this one. Julie, I know that it deals with liability issues for businesses. You know, is your place of business safe for your workers? Is your place of business safe for your customers? And what does that look like? And to what extent is liability in place, or where are businesses protected if they've taken reasonable steps? Did I capture that one fairly well, Julie?
Yeah, I think the recommendation from the committee really focused on the liability part of it. Businesses who were afraid to reopen in case there was an outbreak of COVID related to their business somehow, would they be held liable? And so there's a lot of legal safety, I think, for businesses who want to reopen, as long as they're doing it following the guidelines, that they would not be liable. And I think that was the primary piece of the return to work plan that our committee was most interested in.
And I think it's important to emphasize that our committee clearly, the task force clearly recognized that we're not going to support blanket immunity. You know, this needs to be reasoned in terms of, if you're following the recommended guidelines being provided to you as a business by the state and by the municipality, that should be sufficient to protect your business from liability risk if somebody were to come down with the COVID-19 virus, either as a customer or as an employee. That was our point there. Did I answer your question, Assemblymember LaFrance?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next slide then. The federal government recommendations. We have had a number of recommendations come out of this working group. Expanding current legislation so that we broaden the eligibility for a broader spectrum of nonprofit organizations to access relief funds. Currently only C3s, which are your charitable nonprofits, and C19s, which are your military and veteran nonprofits, are eligible for any of the relief programs. So, for example, Julie's organization and my organization are not eligible for relief funds, which is interesting given the work that we are doing on behalf of the community and the business community. But be that as it may, that was one of our major recommendations early on. Making sure to include seasonal businesses in protections and flexibility to access relief funds to address their needs for the seasonal realities of our tourism, our fishing, and our construction businesses in Alaska. Reducing, easing, or eliminating grant matching requirements for federal grant programs. You know, in many cases, it's a one-to-one grant program traditionally for the EDA. I am pleased to say that the new EDA $1.5 billion fund nationally for initial assistance and covers a broad gamut of issues. There's about $266 million available within the Pacific Northwest region. They have reduced that match requirement to 20%, which is more manageable. It would be great if there was no match requirement given the circumstances that we're dealing with, but it is an improvement. We want to have allowances for CARES and HEROES funding for state and municipal revenue replacement. We know the dire straits that municipalities across the state of Alaska and the United States, and in particular here in our own community of Anchorage, are dealing with in terms of the constraints that are starting to develop on revenue streams to maintain government services that are so critical to our community as we move forward during this pandemic. And then finally, fully fund the employment trusts. There, you know, with the dramatic draws that are being made with nearly 90,000 Alaskans applying for the first time for unemployment benefits in the last several weeks, there is a reasoned question as to how long that is going to be sustainable when it comes to the Alaska Unemployment Trust Fund. And so we felt that there needed to be federal involvement in making sure that all the trust funds across the United States for unemployment benefits remain solvent. And with that, I'll ask for the next slide and hand off to my co-chair, Julie.
And actually, before you start, I do have a question from Mr. Gates.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't type to ask a question quick enough. This was a short follow-up to Mr. Pop, your response to Ms. LaFrance's question on the U.S. Chamber's National Return to Work Plan and insurance and policy. So I believe that tort liabilities can be limited by legislation. I wondered if there was any, or you aware of any drafted legislation at the federal or state level that might limit or liability or that addresses non-liability for people returning to work for businesses. Is there any draft legislation in the works yet?
Not that I am aware of. There has been discussions in Congress about this. There's been calls for it, but we have not seen any of that kind of legislation show up in any of the recent additions to the CARES Act. Julie, did I miss anything there? Okay.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, so at this point in time, no, there is not any movement on that of significance in the form of legislation under consideration.
Thank you. One reason I asked is there's some news articles about lawsuits that are coming related to this across the nation. Thank you.
And I just to extemporize on that particular topic, I can tell you that there are any number of public-facing businesses that are caught in the dilemma of whether or not to reopen partially or completely when that level of opening is going to be offered for that simple liability issue. They are very concerned about what their business could be facing in the form of liability risk if they were to reopen, even if we were to get an order from the mayor to go to full open status. Given that the virus is still active in our community based on case counts, that is something that is definitely on the minds of publicly facing companies, as well as construction companies or businesses that do not necessarily interact with the public, because their workforce is interacting with the public. So it's a big question.
Thank you. I have one more question. Ms. Zalata?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along the same lines, has there been any discussion with the task force about possibly secondary insurance through a risk pool?
I don't believe we've gone that far in that, now we're getting into an area of complexity that our group hasn't really risen to yet. We've been trying to get, some definitive action on just the limitation of liability as being the most straightforward response to this. I would assume that if we start to get clarity that there's not an appetite for that in the necessary government bodies, that we would then have to start to talk about alternatives, because it will affect the willingness of business to open.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll hand off to Julie.
Okay, hearing no other questions on that. Here's this slide is a handful of really direct actions that we have taken to date. And when Bill started this and he said 9 weeks, in some ways, it's hard to believe it's only been 9 weeks, and in some ways it feels like 9 months. So in those 9 weeks, here's some of the direct actions that we've taken in addition to elevating the policy discussions. First, we developed an Anchored Strong website and robust social platforms so that we can push this information that businesses and workforce are looking for, and we're trying to be a one-stop shop for where do I go to find out about the various assistance programs, whether they're federal or state or local. Where do I go to find out what the current mandates are? When are some of those mandates going to be lifted? We try to create a very simple but content-rich website, and I think that our communications group has really achieved it, as well as pushing information out on social platforms to help businesses understand where they can find information. There's a text platform that we're all very excited about. I think it's kind of in beta testing right now. I will give you the number, and it's pretty amazing what it can do. It really tries to customize the information that it serves up to you. If any of you have a pen, I'll just read the number real quickly and we can provide it again in other formats. But 907-891-7192. 907-891-7192. If you type strong, STRONG to that, you'll see the capabilities of this platform. And again, we're just introducing it and doing some testing right now, but it's fascinating, and a lot of work went in providing this tool. Some of the key messages that we've been working to deliver across any platforms with the business community and any local media that we've been able to garner, sharing and promoting, as I mentioned, all COVID-19 related orders, mandates, messages, and events from the city. promoting the trusted sources for facts and information. We all know there's a lot of misinformation available out there, but really directing people to sites like the CDC website, other trusted state and local government sources. We've also developed and disseminated a FAQ list regarding new laws related to the pandemic. This really came out of our workforce working group, primarily I think laws related around workforce issues, and got that disseminated or available at least to folks who were seeking that out. Information how to apply for loans and grants, and this is where it's just a ton of work trying to keep up with the changes, what's available, what is closed, where do you go to apply. And then our most recent campaign, hopefully you've seen it somewhere on a Facebook site or out on another social platform, but be a hero, wear a mask. One thing that we're hearing from the business community, particularly the retail community, is as they try to follow the guidelines and they require customers to wear a cloth face mask or a face covering, there's been a lot of resistance, and particularly for businesses that maybe have a younger workforce, trying to manage their responsibilities, trying to manage new safety and sanitizing protocols, and then trying to manage customers who are angry about a masking policy, even though it's a recommended guideline, is a lot. And so we're trying to support those businesses with a educational campaign about face coverings. So I think the next slide is all for Bill.
Thank you, Julie. We're coming to the end of our presentation. This is our last discussion slide. And this is the forward-looking view. You know, we recognize that this is going to be a long slog, and the volunteers remain committed on the task force to continuing to participate. We recognize it's going to ebb and flow. We are thankful that we are no longer doing 7 days worth of effort every week. We're now, I think, down to either 5.5 or 6 days of effort. And we're getting to see the sunshine every now and then. It is a lot of work and a lot of effort on the part of both the members of the task force as well as the members of the working groups, the dozens and dozens and dozens of members of the working groups, and the staff support team. And we recognize that this is going to continue into the foreseeable future, likely well into next year is what is a running point of view within the task force. We know that we're going to need to continue to advise all levels of government as we keep trying to identify gaps and needs in relief programs. And then we also are going to need to identify likely new challenges as they develop. We're reopening the economy. That process is starting. It comes with certain risks that we all, I think, recognize of potential flare-ups, as well as some of the unintended consequences of some of the relief programs. For example, the payroll protection program, which is targeting specifically employers keeping their employees on the job, versus the expanded benefits that are being provided from the federal government for the unemployment rolls, which are paying unemployment benefits equal to in the neighborhood of between $55,000 and $60,000 a year equivalent in monthly payments. This is turning into a challenge for some businesses to lure their workers back. They are telling them to come back to work as they start to reopen, and the workers are looking at their paycheck that they used to make and the unemployment benefits that they're now getting, and they're saying, you know what, I think I'm going to wait a little while. I'm not going to feel safe coming back to work until maybe the end of July. These are some of the challenges that we're dealing with there. We know that home mortgages and the rental market and homelessness are all issues in flux right now. We are seeing some relief in the mortgage market, both from mortgage companies and banks, but also from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, working to work with homeowners to keep them in their home. They don't want to foreclose on these loans. They want to keep people in their homes. So we're seeing, for example, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are giving a year's abeyance on mortgage payments and tacking them on to an additional year on their existing loan. We're going to keep watching that closely to see if there is more to be done there. The rental market is going to be something we have to watch very closely because we don't think we've seen the true effects on the rental market yet, because there are a couple of things that are in play here. Sooner or later, the rental, the ban on evictions is going to end. When it does, and under current circumstances, all of the past due rent is going to come due. That's going to be a real challenge for renters. In addition to that, we think that there is the potential of population leaving our community in fairly substantial numbers, which could impact the rental market in terms of increased vacancies. And then the homelessness situation, I don't think I need to tell the Assembly anything about the homeless situation that they don't already know, because there's nothing that I could tell you other than the fact that we recognize too that this is a critical issue that is going to have some increased impacts in the community that are going to have to be addressed in the coming months as this situation unfolds. We are looking at key facilities in terms of how to make sure that they are places that our citizens and our visitors will want to make use of in the day-to-day life of Alaska. How do we reactivate our convention centers? My organization puts on an event twice a year that draws nearly 1,500 people. We are not doing that event this summer in a facility. We are going to be going to a virtual event model. We are hopeful that we'll be able to return to the facility to hold our normal luncheon in January, but right now nobody can tell us that that's a very good idea. So we're going to play that by ear until we see how things develop. The airport, having millions of passenger enplanements in a normal good year. What is it going to look like in terms of making sure that the airport is a safe place for passengers to transit through? And then other public facilities, libraries, schools, etc. All of these are going to be really tough, knotty issues to unwind and come up with good strategies for. Unemployment is going to be a fairly significant issue for our city, as it will be across the country in the coming months. We basically have a lost tourism season this year. We have significant impacts to restaurants, retail, number of other service businesses. Construction is likely going to be affected from the private sector side of things. This is going to put a lot of people in some pretty tough situations when it comes to what do I do now? And how we help those workers to get through a reskilling process. How do we address skills shortages to get them into another industry? Where is the training going to be done? How is it going to be paid for? How do we target this in a data-driven way so that we aren't just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping something sticks? And the odds of that working out well are pretty thin. So these are all some of the issues that we're starting to talk about. And new investments in Anchorage. How do we get Anchorage back on the track to growth? How do we look at key areas of our city like downtown, the UMed district, the Chester Creek Greenbelt, and other aspects of our community that need reinvestment that will make our city more attractive to hold on to the workforce that we have and to attract new workforce that we're going to need in the future to as contributing to the overall growth of our economy in the future. So we haven't addressed any of these issues. These are passing, a limited list of the many topics that have come up that we all are commenting about between us, both individually and through the ERTF, as being future things that we're going to have to start to address once we get over the immediacy of the response efforts that are currently underway. We'll leave you with this thought. Anchorage is going to be a different city in the future, and so we are thinking very clearly that we are going to have to address this question of how do we influence the future in a positive direction to make our city more resilient and sustainable, because I think we just found out how many different aspects of our community, to use the parable, were built out of straw and have blown away in this pandemic wind. And, do we rebuild that same house of straw, or do we look to build a more resilient house of brick in the future that is our economy? And with that, we'll go to our last slide and say thank you very much on behalf of myself and my co-chair, Julie Soppe, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much to the co-chairs for your presentation. Before I turn it over to the queue, just a reminder, so we built a lot of time for this meeting today so that we could have robust discussion. Tomorrow, we're also going to be discussing business issues in a business roundtable, but the agenda is not going to allow for as much back and forth. So right now is really the time to ask your questions. And just one additional reminder. So after we hear from the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team and their work, there will be an opportunity to put any specific requests for exploration to the task force, specifically the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force. So if you want to save those for after we hear from Senator Mark Begich. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start with a comment by Ms. LaFrance, if you want to go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you mean the comment I put into the chat?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I did text the platform strong and was immediately impressed with all the information and the follow-up questions that I received. So thank you for your work on that. And thank you to Bill and Julie and all the members of the ERTF and the subcommittees for the tremendous amount of work you're doing. And I very much appreciate it. And I think that it will be definitely instrumental in that question of what are we going to rebuild, what anchorage will we be in the future? So thank you very, very much for all your effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, thanks. It is a comment and then a question. That's also a comment. One is, you appreciate all the stuff that you're working on, and I do think that in this kind of crisis or event that we can learn and grow and come out of it really improved in many ways. As individuals and businesses and kind of the broad society. I looked at the group of people on the task force, and it's in the organizations, and it looks pretty good. But I was surprised that there's no union representation on that list. And, a lot of the issues that you present, they're, workers and people with renters and so on. And, I've learned in the last 4 years, unions bring a good perspective and know their people very well. And I think the group would benefit by having some representation, a union. And a kind of broader perspective on that is, we have a real unfortunate viewpoint in our society, I think, which is there's kind of business versus labor. And it's not really, that doesn't make sense, and it's damaging. And this is an opportunity, if we're going to move forward as a society, to try to chip away at that and say, you are us. But did you have any unions participate, and what are your thoughts on that? Thanks.
I would say that I don't, honestly, we can't keep track of who's in the working groups from day to day because there are people coming in and going out of these working groups with different issues. I will tell you that workforce has been a front and center issue right from day one in this because of the clear recognition that the workforce needs a hell of a lot of help right now in the challenges that they are facing. And that was one of our core areas of focus in terms of communication and getting information out. I think that is a fair observation, Assemblymember Weddleton, and we are happy to take that back to the group and make sure that that area of workforce representation is woven into the task force going forward, if it isn't already.
Thanks, and I guess I can add one point in here. So I know that Marvin Jones, the president of Unite Here, which is the union that represents workers in restaurants and many of tourism-related businesses, Mr. Jones is a part of the workforce subgroup. So there's at least one union representation that I know of.
Thank you for throwing me a lifeline, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill and Julie, thank you both for heading all of this up. I've been really excited about having this meeting today, just to hear all that you had to tell us about. And I have two questions. And Bill, I think the first one's probably for you, because I believe you're the one that had the slide that talked about some of the problems that people had experienced. And you mentioned broadband access and availability.
Mhm.
And I had some questions about that a couple of weeks ago, and talking to the Muni IT director, there wasn't a sense that that was a problem for any of the municipal employees. But I do know that the Anchorage School District found some significant gaps in broadband access when they went through and really surveyed all of their students. And I was quite impressed by some of the information that they found. And it seemed to me they thought there was about 500 students or maybe 500 families that really didn't have good access. And so anyway, I don't know if you have some specifics on why that was a comment. Did that come from certain industries? Did that come from certain areas of the municipality? Can you elaborate a little bit more on what specific finds or comments you might have had in that regard?
Sure. If member, through the chair, my apologies. Assembly member, I believe if I remember the conversation correctly, this was coming through a combination of focused mainly around workforce, and then some of the collateral conversation that you just mentioned in regards to the ability for the school district and the universities both to pivot into an online platform, and the challenges that they were running into, both from the equipment side of things as well as the access to adequate bandwidth. I think the business community didn't quite have as big an impact as far as the white collar industries that are trying to work online. But overall, I think what we have is, for a city of our size, we have really good overall broadband infrastructure, but that does not necessarily denote access to broadband. There is an economic factor in that, in the affordability of broadband to portions of our population. And then there is also the quality of broadband in given areas of our community that may not be up as high as it might be in other parts of Anchorage, which can make a difference in the ability to work online or learn online, or even to effectively exist online. So those are just some of the general memories that I have of how this rose to the level of a recommendation from our group. Julie, was there anything that I missed there?
Yeah, I'd like to add just a little bit. It's a great question. Thank you for it. So Bill addressed kind of the first part of that bullet point, which was broadband access. The second part, the digital divide, had a couple of meetings. One is access, depending on economic strata. The other part of it was trying to figure out how to help our businesses have a better online presence. How to figure out how to train so that our local businesses could compete with the likes of Amazon, could compete in an online world. So some of that is training, helping them improve their websites, helping them improve their search engine optimization, their keywords. A lot of it is really education and finding the resources and helping our business community learn how to compete in a more digital world than maybe they've had to in the past if they've got a very enticing storefront. And now that storefront is not helping them. How do we help them make their online presence just as enticing and able to compete with some of the larger national chains?
Great, thank you both. I appreciate that. It really does give me a little bit more background there, because I really had some real infrastructure questions, whether or not we did have the capacity to do what we needed to do in the municipality. But anyway, I have a second question, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This other one, I don't know who wants to take this one, but I'm getting a lot of information, a lot of feedback right now about people in the healthcare industry and those who basically are working in non-COVID related parts of the healthcare industry. And I'm hearing that some really aren't back at work yet. Hospitals are not at full staff. Anyway, and that doesn't even begin to touch the non-hospital related healthcare industry. So how much feedback have you gotten from those people? And what kind of insights can you give us as to what's happening there? And, maybe that's one of those further investigation kind of pieces that you were talking about. But anyway, if you have any comments on that, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Julie, I think I'll go ahead and grab this one.
Yes.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Kennedy, it's one of those sectors that initially people thought was going to grow because of the COVID-19 outbreak, that there would be, a shortage of healthcare workers. There was an existing shortage of nurses before this began, and a challenged environment of physicians. But given the flattening of the curve and the luck that we have had to go with that, our healthcare system has come through pretty well without being overwhelmed. But having said that, we are seeing a big hit to the healthcare employment sector in the non-emergency sectors. Dentist's office, family practices, specialty shops, in-home care, a number of different sectors contained within the healthcare sector that are seeing some pretty significant impacts. I can't quote you numbers yet because the preliminary numbers that will mean anything don't come out until tomorrow. But I will promise you that if the data is posted in a timely manner, which has been a bit of a challenge for the state here in the last couple of months, but if it is posted in a timely manner, I should have some initial glimpse of what those job numbers look like when I do my presentation tomorrow in tomorrow's session.
Well, great. Thank you, Bill. Or I shouldn't say great because now I'm depressed, but I do appreciate the information. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question on what's the best way for Assembly members to get access to the ERTF findings and any insights. For example, do you expect to continue to hold briefings with the Assembly or have a report? Thanks.
Julie, do you want to start and I'll finish, or okay, I'll jump in.
I'll let you go.
Okay, thank you. So number of questions there. First of all, ERTF recommendations and information as far as actions that we have taken are posted on the anchoragestrong.info site, which we have propped up as a easy to use tool for businesses, for workforce, and for the public to understand what's going on related to the COVID-19 response efforts, how to apply for for grants, how to apply for unemployment, what's the latest health rules, what are the latest announcements from the mayor's office in regards to specific policy statements related to COVID policy, and then also the recommendations that we are making directly to different levels of government are also posted there. We do not hold public meetings, and we do this only because this is a challenging enough environment for us to manage. We are an ad hoc group. We are not an official body of government, and so we just have tried to keep this in this group so that we can move quickly and be fleet of foot in terms of our discussions, etc. For the first few weeks, we were meeting practically every other day. We are now down to once a week meetings. We are getting our first break next week because our meetings are held on Mondays, and Monday is a holiday, and by golly, we all want to take that holiday. But we are doing our best to be transparent. We do have city representatives in the group with Chris Schutte and Alex Slivka, who are participating in our meetings, as well as other municipal staff. And we are communicating amongst ourselves very well in terms of the different working groups, the meeting notes, et cetera, that we get. This is all fairly raw stuff, though, and we're working towards refining our recommendations so that when we bring forward a recommendation, either at the full ERTF or even the working groups make recommendations all the time also that are within the, the general, I guess, boundaries, for lack of better expression, that have developed within our overall conversations about what the group thinks about different issues. So that's a big, long-winded answer, but we would be happy to provide more frequent updates going forward now that the tempo and the pace has eased up a little bit. We always are ready to come back and address the assembly at any point in time. Please know that we've got day jobs in addition to our ERTF jobs, so we're hopeful that you will be kind to us. Perhaps monthly briefings might be a good thing, or every 6 weeks in that neighborhood. But Julie and I'm speaking for you, Julie, but I don't think you'll object. We are happy to come back and interact with the assembly as a group at any time in the future that you need us to. And we're always accessible to individual assembly members as co-chairs. So you can always reach out to us, and I think you know how to find us. Did I cover everything? Did I get it all?
Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Yep. Thank you both.
Thank you. So one follow-up that I had, and then if anyone else wants to ask any questions, please put yourself in the queue. So to either of the co-chairs, as we continue discussing and considering the best use of the various buckets of CARES Act funding and stimulus heading our way, what is your projected timeline for getting recommendations to the administration and to the assembly?
Julie, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
As soon as possible, is that? Rapid deployment has been kind of a mantra across all groups, but of course, I say that, of course, we understand it has to be done thoughtfully as well. But Bill?
Mr. Chair, we had not really had this on our radar quite yet because it had been such a intellectual discussion in terms of when and if the money would ever get out of the state treasury into the municipal treasury. We were also waiting to have that conversation with the administration as to what their thoughts were in regards to what the likely use of those funds might be. I think that I can speak for the ERTF in the fact that we applaud the grant fund, the pilot program that was propped up. I don't think that you would hear any objections and only applause from the ERTF if that was funded further. Once this initial pilot round is done, cash is going to be a huge issue. The analogy that I liken to use in this is that there are a number of businesses that the federal programs have propped up, and that is a good thing. That was the intention of those funds, to help get them across the raging river that is this period of pandemic. The concerns that I'm starting to have, and I believe this is shared by the ERTF, is that the bridge that is being built by those programs has basically gotten them out into the middle of the river. And that, it's a long drop and a terrible ending in the river. We're going to lose businesses. That is a pretty obvious statement, but it's going to be a significant number. Everything from the sole proprietor type businesses to some nameplate businesses that have been long mainstays of Anchorage. We haven't seen that happen yet because of all the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been injected into our Anchorage economy through the federal programs, and beginning next week, if everything goes according to plan, the additional 280 or so million that is going to start to reach across the state in the state's grant program that's about to be launched next week. That sounds like a lot of money, but in all honesty, given the challenges that the business community faces, we need all hands on deck. So additional support for businesses and continuing that grant program would be a good thing. And I believe you will likely see good demonstrable outcomes in the rent and homeowner assistance program that you've invested in through 211 and through the United Way effort. I think you need to be looking at that one also for any number of reasons, from a policy and a community and a decent human thing to do point of view.
And if I can just add a little bit, early on, one of the work groups came and used the phrase "the lost generation of local business," and it's really concerning when you look at our local businesses and you think about businesses that are, definitely good business ventures. They've proved themselves 10, 15, 20 years. And this is just such an extraordinary circumstance, and yet we might lose valuable businesses to our community through this. And those are, every business size, as Bill said, nameplate businesses that you wouldn't think are struggling. And a lot of the businesses, I'll just speak from a tourism perspective, they may have got their last real revenue last September, and they may not really see any more revenue until next May. Even the most viable, healthy business, that's something that you just can't plan for and tie up money to last 18 months. So any money that can be deployed into the business community, again, grants, not loans, is extremely valuable.
And I would echo that, grants, not loans. Adding more debt to their ledger is not the way to help them. This is extraordinary circumstances. The survey that we did of businesses at Anchorage Economic Development Corporation in last month demonstrated a response rate that told us 16% of the businesses responding to the survey, representing most major sectors of the economy in a good solid way in terms of the number of respondents, 16% felt their business was at risk of closing permanently. And another 22% weren't sure if they were going to be able to avoid closure or stay open. Only about 61% of the businesses responding to the survey out of the 253 businesses said that they were confident that they would be able to ride this out. That is a huge risk factor for the size, shape, and health of our economy.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Any questions from the members? I guess at this point, I'll open it up to the administration if the administration wants to add any additional information.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. You're hearing silence because Julie and Bill covered the topic expertly, and we don't have much to add other than their thanks. I still vividly remember that 6:30 a.m. call, Bill, when I told you your world is turning upside down, so get ready. The work that the ERTF has done on behalf of the city has been impressive. And of course, thanks goes to not only that group, but to the Assembly as well. There's been a number of initiatives that have come out of the ERTF effort that we've brought to the Assembly for your approval at Assembly meetings, and you have been very helpful in that regard. So look forward to the continued activities of the ERTF, and as they demonstrated in the early section of their presentation, it's about a vision of not only how do we get through the COVID-19 pandemic, but what does the Anchorage economy look like in a post-pandemic world? And that's, to me, some of the more exciting work that is soon to come. So thank you, everyone, for your support and your efforts, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. And yes, I want to echo those comments from Mr. Schutte and just really thank the co-chairs and all of the members of the ERTF for your hard work. I was very impressed with the very short amount of time that I spent with the ERTF when I made the recommendation for the minority and disadvantaged small business and workforce subgroup, and the level of engagement and interest in creating another of many work groups that you all already have. So yeah, I want to thank you both. So at this time, if I'm not seeing any other questions, we're a little bit early, so I'm hoping that Senator Begich has joined us. Are you with us, Senator? And if you're on a phone, you would press *6 to unmute yourself. I'm not sure if you're one of those phone numbers. Okay, so I'm not seeing the senator yet. So he'll join us at least by 2. That's when he was scheduled to join us. So at this point, I'll go ahead and move around in the agenda to the part after the senator had spoken, which is any specific requests that the members have for the Mayor's Economic Resiliency Task Force to consider. So if there's any areas of interest that you may have, this is a group, as I have learned, that's eager and willing to explore issues that are important to the residents and businesses and workers of the municipality. So I'll open it up to that part of this discussion if folks have any specific requests for the ERTF to dive into. And it could be that the co-chairs are doing a fantastic job and there are no additional requests, which is probably true. So I'll go ahead, just give it another second. Yes, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. And I apologize that I came a little bit late. So if this was already covered and you're already handling it, fantastic. But I've been talking with a number of folks about the intersection of going back to work and childcare. And I know we're going to take childcare up separately, but this has really been on my mind for a couple of reasons. One, we may have folks whose childcare will be with individuals who could be vulnerable, such as grandparents, and there's just a risk associated with that and kind of working through those logistics. There's less opportunity for childcare and camp this summer, given some of the mandates and just the number of facilities open. And then I believe there's some economic uncertainty around paying for childcare right now. If someone has either been off work and they're going back to work, or if, and as they get called back into their workplace, the uncertainty of whether or not that time, you know, we could revert backwards. And so there's just some uncertainty around that. And really, without some certainty around childcare, that really does put a lot of families in some economic uncertainty. So I just wanted to raise it as an issue and hope that it's a part of your conversation. I know the body will be taking it up in some other forums, but I definitely wanted to make sure it was on your guys' radar. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel, you've brought up an issue that has been definitely discussed at the ERTF, and it is a thorny, difficult, challenging issue. We know that workforce needs daycare, childcare in some form to be able to go back to work, and this is going to have a pretty profound effect. It is one of the issues that can affect a worker in the fact that, or an employer in the fact that if an employee does not have adequate childcare and is being called back to work, that is one of the good cause grounds to raise to continue on unemployment until childcare options become available. Another element to this on the childcare provider side of things is the issue that we raised earlier in the liability issue. If ever there were liability in the business sector, the liability for people taking care of other people's children is on an order of magnitude, just in the emotional sense, if not the literal sense. And this is causing any number of childcare providers to have clear hesitation about reopening without knowing what their risk is in opening and providing that service if the disease were to break out in their facility. And they've done all the safeguards recommended. So those are things that have come up in discussion. We have not reached a point yet of being able to offer direct recommendations. We did, in part, make the recommendation about the liability issue with childcare in mind. It definitely came up in the discussion as being a critical issue for gaining some form of limitation on liability, as long as a provider of business like a childcare center is doing everything that they can within the guidelines appropriately to protect their clients, the children and the parents, with the services that they are providing. So I wish I had a quick and easy answer for you. This one's going to be a tough one. But I do want to assure you that we'll take this back to the ERTF and see what we can do to start getting the ball rolling in terms of something more substantive than the liability issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes.
This is Jason Bockenstedt. I just wanted to make a brief comment in response to that and say to Assembly Member Zalatel that this issue in particular, from the administration perspective, is at the top of our list in terms of figuring out how do we thread this needle. So you have a very willing partner from our side to figure out what a program will look like to provide childcare services for folks, and to make sure that the many childcare facilities that are within Anchorage are still operational over the coming months. And that's a real concern. And we've all seen a number of op-eds and articles in the papers over the last several weeks concerning this. So this is very much at the top of our list, and we definitely want to try to solve this.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks. And I guess using a Falseyism as a matter of preview, on the Thursday, May 28th meeting, that's the Community Impacts Roundtable, we do have a full hour set aside, and that one's going to be a marathon meeting. That's 4 hours, a lot of different topics, but we do have a full hour set aside to talk about childcare. So I guess get ready for that meeting on the 28th. Okay, so I see now that we are joined by Senator Begich. So unless there are any other questions for the co-chairs, we will go ahead and turn over to the senator for his discussion on the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team. I'm not seeing any. Again, a big thank you to the co-chairs, Julie and Bill, for joining us today. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Senator.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I apologize. I'm on a call every morning or every day at 1 o'clock with folks in Washington, D.C., about 40 folks on what's going on the national level with CARES Act and other legislation. I apologize. They ran a little late. And I know you guys are running early, so that's a good thing. Governor Parnell and I, as you know, were asked by Governor Dunleavy to head up the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team to kind of look at and reach out to people all across the state from many different sectors of the economy and from elected officials and others to find out kind of what they think is needed, what are some of the challenges, and then hopefully looking for some innovation and ideas, not only about the immediate problems that we face, but the longer term issues of how do you stabilize the economy once coronavirus is stabilized or in a decrease, because we still have challenges with the price of oil and several other things. So we looked at it from a short term and a long term. Predominantly our work from our end is completed, and when I say completed, in the sense of gathering information that we then delivered to the governor in multiple documents, which are now posted on the governor's page, the state of Alaska, which has 4 documents plus a 5th kind of summary document. All those documents, there we go. Thank you for who's ever putting that up. I appreciate it. Those information sheets give you a pretty good detail of what we heard from people. We had talked to over 3,000 people at the point from all sectors of the state, or areas of the state and sectors of the economy. We know we didn't hit everybody. You know, that's tough to do in 6 weeks, but we wanted to get as much information. Predominantly what came to our attention, and you can kind of see it in our, we did an op-ed piece on this for the Daily News, and several of the papers around the state carried it. We had 3 overriding issues in the broad sense, and that was first, getting dollars into the hands of consumers, residents of Alaska sooner than later. We knew the federal government would be distributing their $1,200 per person, then $500 per dependent dollars at a certain point, but that would only go to a certain component of the population. And that was only going to be a one-time shot. We also knew that unemployment benefits would have the bonus of $600 a week on top of the regular benefits people would receive for a several month, I think it's 4-month period, which also was important. But again, that's not everyone in the economy. So we made a very strong point, pretty consistent from day one, that we recognize that you have to get money, continue to circulate in the economy. Second was within the small business community, especially the small business community, there was going to be a huge disruption in specialized sections, maybe visitor industry, tourism industry as an example. Fishing, we caught that at the very beginning. One of our first meetings we had was with the fishing industry because we could kind of see out 2 months and thought, you know, if we don't come up with a plan of action here, we could see that industry disappear very quickly. And along with that is, besides the visitor industry, was the retail segment of the economy. But coupled with this was a kind of a sidebar, which was out of our control and out of anyone's real control, was the fight between Saudi Arabia and Russia on the price of oil, which, as some of you saw during those 6 weeks or 8 weeks we were working on this, it dropped to a negative number on the price of oil on the open market, which has caused some other stress points to the economy. But again, we recognized, and so we not only did we work with the state to get ADA to reconsider how they do the business of just doing these large infrastructure project loans, but to be a conduit, which they are now going to be, a conduit for grants and loan dollars to distribute to small businesses throughout Alaska. And they have a program which was announced, the legislature passed it. It's a grant/loan program, people under 50 employees and under. Again, we made this point because we knew, maybe by instinct, maybe by just enough information we were getting, the first tranche of the PPP loan money from the federal government would be drained very quickly. And it did. Within a week, that money was gone. And I think it's $349 billion was distributed and gone. And there was still lots of businesses that still needed money. So we knew there had to be a backstop. Plus, there was going to be industries that would not be able to tap into that because of certain restrictions under the federal law. And lastly, which was important, we tapped into, matter of fact, Anchorage Economic Development Corporation and other groups to give us ideas on what is the new Alaska economy that we need to be focused on. You all did something recently with the $1 million for small businesses, but we're talking about what's the kind of investment that we should be thinking about as a collective group, not just the state of Alaska, but you all as City of Anchorage and other communities, of investing in the new economy, where there are some that are just right on the verge of breakthroughs in new parts of our economy that are not negatively impacted by coronavirus, except that their capital markets have disappeared because people are in a cautious mode or they've lost liquidity. So we made a very strong point. It's a pretty aggressive number. You know, and everything we put out, just so you know, Governor Parnell and I, may we be from different parties, we 100% agreed on every item you see in these documents. We didn't put things out there that we didn't agree on, and we put everything that we felt was well thought out, or at least information that needed to be shared in a broad sense. And we recommended for the state of Alaska to seriously consider upwards to 500 million to $1 billion of capital that can become available for the new economy that we have to build in order to sustain ourselves beyond coronavirus. Again, within the documents, a lot of good detail. One piece of the puzzle that came up multiple times is the need for the state combined. We have some ideas, very kind of creative ideas around capital investment that needs to be done in the state. With or without coronavirus, you're going to have to invest in infrastructure and other things. So from our perspective, we think we laid out a pretty good framework here. Pieces of it have been, as you heard yesterday, we were pressing that the dividend be distributed not in October, but sooner, because the faster you get that money in the economy, and you probably all recognize this, from 2 weeks ago to today, the streets are a little more crowded, the stores are a little more crowded, and you need to keep that money circulating in the economy. So the governor's decision of moving that to July, that $1,000 instead of October, is what we had been recommending in various ways, that early dollar come forward. The ADA money that's now becoming, maybe by this next week, we'll have the guidelines. They have the guidelines, but actually the application process will help move that forward. Now that bulk of this work has been done, what we do now is on an on-call basis, we advise the governor as necessary on issues that he's concerned about or wants feedback from. Both Governor Parnell and I continue to reach out to the communities in different ways to just keep up to speed on the economic developments and what needs to be done. But the big one that's still kind of lingering is capital development projects. I know you guys have passed, voters have voted for some bonds, which you now have in your control to accelerate those as best you can. And that will make a huge difference, again, keeping the money flowing in the economy. I can go through more detail, but that's the gist. And I want to kind of give you a macro and kind of a little bit, but those information sheets are fairly well detailed out on the work we've done. But I'm happy to take any questions from any of the folks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have any questions on the work of the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team? And as folks think of their questions, I will say those 4 information sheets have a lot of really good information. So if you haven't had a chance yet to review those, I would. Gives you a good snapshot of what folks have been thinking and the evolution of that thinking over the last 6 weeks. So again, I'll ask if there are any questions for Senator Begich on the work of the Alaska Economic Stabilization Team.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one more comment? You have one document called the Economic Transition. This was also developed at the very end because we wanted to make sure, again, these documents don't just end up on a webpage that people can review 10 years from now and say, wow, that was some interesting information, but actually the steps necessary to kind of move to the next level to get these ideas into reality. But these ideas will only go forward if people become advocates for them or they think they're valuable. I will underline and put in bold and caps, and I think Governor Parnell would have echoed this, and that is the investment into the new economy of Alaska is going to be important. If it's just to patch the holes of today, it is not going to solve the problem that we're about to face with still low price on oil and less revenue to the state, which feeds down to the economy, which feeds down to your tax base, and so on. So I just want to really emphasize that last document. It's a shorter document, but it's really about here's what has to be done to take the next step from our perspective. And we're not saying we're the professionals in this. We were kind of the conduits of the information and tried to be a collective voice.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. So you'd mentioned that, we'd passed a bunch of bonds and it'd be good to get those out quick. And I wondered, what's your sense of the municipal bond market? I mean, is that active now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot, if you look in the private sector, there's a lot of companies that are, reaching and getting more capital as quickly as as quickly as they can in large amounts from not only equity and loan capacity. There's some information that's available, and I think, and Jason, I cannot recall if I haven't, I'll make sure, from the group that I do some work with in Washington, D.C., Brownstein Hyatt, there's lots of white papers they've done, especially around municipal funding. There's some documentation. We're also, from the work I do in Washington, D.C., we advise the National League of Cities, and we believe this next tranche will do two more things. One is potentially open up an opportunity for some new capital money for local and state governments and some potential more flexible money. But on the financing end, yes, the rates are fantastic right now. This, for good solid cities, and Anchorage would be considered in that list compared to the marketplace of today. I guarantee you, there is some good value out there in the marketplace right now for the bonds that you all sold that the voters supported, that you have available to put into market.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you. I have a question now that you brought up Washington, D.C. So what is the current state of play with that latest round of funding? And when do you think that might come to a vote?
This is if you asked me that question yesterday, Felix, I would have a different answer than I have today, less than an hour ago. And I say that because not only do I sit on these 1 p.m. calls, there's a 5 a.m. call, sadly, because of the time zone difference that I'm on, that throughout the day we're monitoring these things. Because again, one of the groups I advise strategically, we advise some other communities around this country. And we believe, based on the information we have as of today, that the month of June will be what I would consider local state government and capital investment and liability issues. And what I mean by that is, I think there's going to be another tranche of money available for states and local governments. There's a mixed bag on this. The Democrats are interested, and there's a split caucus in the Republican side, and I'm talking about the Senate right now, that are interested in this. So I think at the end of the day, there'll be some resource as we're talking in June. The other thing that I think is coming up is there's some legislation that's starting to move. We know the president has a infrastructure bill, in his OMB, about $1 trillion 10-year highway bill. We know that the water bill, which is the Corps of Engineer bill, WERDA, is moving, and there's some others. So there's a desire to kind of package up this kind of infrastructure items in June. The third item, which there's a desire by some to limit liability for companies. An example, let's say you walk in the cars and they're doing all the things properly to make sure it's safe, but you go in, a week later or 10 days later, you now have the coronavirus. You now are going to sue Albertsons or Cars, because that's the storage. You walked in, but Albertson owns it, because they didn't do something right. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. There's a lot of businesses that are very, very nervous about this, big and small. The fight, of course, there is with trial lawyers and corporations, Chamber of Commerce. So there's a little mixed bag there. But I do think June, Felix, is kind of the, and I say June like it's, a long ways off. As you know, it's only about 10 days off. But June, part of, I think maybe even before 4th of July recess that they go back to. That'd be my bet.
Great. And then, so we recently received an email from the National League of Cities about some of their efforts to encourage municipalities to encourage our federal delegation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, with that specifically around the HEROES Act, or in a broader sense on infrastructure? Because I know they had two things. We were on the phone with them yesterday, so I just don't know which one they were sending out at that point. But if it's to get local and state dollars, absolutely, you guys should put that out there, but also make it clear you need flexibility on those dollars. Because if you're not sending that message, and I will tell you, our delegation, I was on the phone with their chiefs of staff yesterday and the day before, they are very in tune to this. They recognize the challenge that you all have and the state has. So I think they're very anxious. I think they're part of the caucus of Republicans in the Senate side that want to have more state and local government and more flexibility. So the answer simply is, if you're thinking about doing a resolution or some sort of support, I would encourage that, and but highlight those points of flexible dollars and being able to use them to stimulate your economy. And I would use a third item, which is flexibility to also help build a new economy based on the aftermath of Corona, because that'd give you some flexibility on. I know Meg, you've talked about it. I know we've talked about it on how do you invest and help small businesses expand and survive, and that's what I would do. So yeah, I think you should.
Thank you. So I think Mr. Slifka wants to comment on the municipal bond question.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. Just a reminder to everybody, but that thanks to the actions that the Assembly took on Tuesday, we are now free to spend that money. And the way we normally do that is we spend the money all summer long. And then when we have reached a critical mass of money spent, then we go to the municipal bond markets in the fall, usually September, October, to actually issue the bonds to pay for that work that's being done. The other thing I just want to make sure that people are aware, because Mark touched on it a little bit, the federal government does have a program out there to help support municipal finance, but it's more of a safety net, and that, as Mark correctly characterized, the municipality being a AAA borrower, we have no problem accessing the credit markets as long as they are fully functioning, which they were earlier in March when we actually issued our tax anticipation notes, but which they weren't for later parts of March into early April. So we're going to obviously be watching the markets with a careful eye when the fall rolls around and as we get closer to the time when we would normally issue debt. And that was it.
And if I can add to that, one of the things that's happening, and I'm sure you're watching very carefully, Alex, and that is the whole liquidity in the Federal Reserve, who their comments 2 days ago, I believe it was, these days kind of run together now. I'm not sure what are weekends and what are weekdays, but the Federal Reserve had good comments about continuing to have liquidity in the marketplace, but they underlined to Congress that they need to put money into the economy. And there is a philosophical debate in Congress of, well, maybe we need to wait and see how this current money is operating. And I think that would be a huge mistake. And I think the Federal Reserve is saying the same thing. You got to keep pushing money into the economy. And lastly, I know you guys have some questions, and I know I've talked to others, both administration and some assembly members, on spending the money you are getting from the state via the federal government. But there's a great question of how can you spend it, what can you spend it. I think you need, is my opinion, I know you'll have plenty of legal and other people will tell you other things, but I would be spending that money as liberally as possible in the sense of meeting impacts of coronavirus. Don't be buying new cars and stuff just because it sounds good for the city to buy them, but stuff that has a direct or indirect relationship to coronavirus that you can document. Because I think the odds down the road that someone comes back and claws that money back from you, from the federal government, is going to be slim pickings. I don't think they're going to do it. But again, that's a risk analysis you will have to do, and I'm sure the people who are keeping track of the money and the lawyers are going to tell you to be very conservative on it. You, in a lot of ways, you got to do what you have to do to keep your economy afloat. And I think the federal government recognizes that. I mean, they're doing an emergency bill right now as we're speaking, less than an hour ago, to extend the time limits. I'm sure it will pass on the Senate side, but to extend the period of time that the PPP loans can be used for. It was only going to be for 8 weeks ending June 30th. I think they'll extend that. They may extend it as far as to the end of the year. because they recognize now that it's too short of a period. So, I would just think long and hard about that, manage your risk, and then figure out how to use that money as quickly as you can, or obligate that money as quickly as you can.
Thank you. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the point that Alex touched on, or the capital projects moving forward using bond money, has there been much discussion at the state or national level about local spend and local hire as we move forward, both either utilizing existing funding sources, or as we look at mitigating the impacts of COVID-19, because we do have a shifting workforce locally due to those impacts. So if you could touch on that a little bit, I would really appreciate it.
Let me make sure I clarify so I understand. So in other words, how that money can be used to enhance local hire, or that is a gap when you're starting to put these projects out?
Well, so that we can enhance local hire where we may have had to look outside before, either through development or maybe to fill the gap if there isn't the funds available in the original projects because of some particular missing thing, or wage gap or something like that.
Yeah, I'll attempt to answer this for you. I appreciate the question. So there's a couple things. One, clearly on the federal level, that will trickle down to the state and the local governments. There is going to be a push when they all come back from their break they're on right now, or going on, that more of the supply chain of important items around medical supplies, medicines, things of that nature are going to be more driven to a local, state, federal, U.S. manufacturer rather than foreign manufacturer. That's that global picture. Now, shrinking it down to where we are today in the city and then the state, there's not been a lot of discussion about how do we solve this problem, because as you know, good example, and I'm sure when I say the statistics, someone's going to correct me somewhere, but I'm close to this, but in the oil and gas industry, 40% approximately of the workforce are not Alaskans. They don't live here. So when you have a situation when you can't allow them into your state, then what do? And the same thing with the fishing industry, and to some degree, the hotel industry when it comes to the summer season. You have foreign workers, J1 workers coming in, as well as in the fish industry. So this is a recognized problem. No one's really said how they're going to solve it yet, because we have a limited workforce, and we have never focused as much as, I think I caught, maybe you had asked the question just as I was getting on with Bill Pop, about the training of the workforce locally, so we don't have to lean so heavily to the outside personnel. May they be in the trades for construction, or they may be in certain industries like fishing or oil and gas. That's going to be a gap. There are people trying to figure out, is this the moment now, finally, that we recognize that we have to take at least 1, 2, 3 top industries that will be here not only today, but into the next 20 years, and start really enhancing and developing training programs and ensuring that we have the workforce for the future. It's a great political line that people use all the time. Let's train the workforce for the future, blah, 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 but no one does anything. And then now we're here. Now we see what the problem is. And the problem is significant because, for example, let's take our oil and gas industry. You may have very critical personnel that only have 1 or 2 people like that that's available. One of them gets sick or unable to travel, you have a serious problem. So there's nothing that's like, here's the plan of action. But I think people have now realized the gaps in the workforce, just like in supply chain for medicine and other things. That's why I wanted to mention that. They're recognizing that, but now there's this other piece of the equation, and that's a localized workforce that you can tap into and keep working for a longer period of time than just these spikes and valleys. And that's totally, I think, we've recommended some things in our documents that were shown earlier by the chairman. But I think you need some action, and there's not a lot of meat and potatoes yet on that, to be honest with you. At least that I've seen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Allard?
Hi, thank you. So this is kind of going back to when before Ms. Salatel, when Senator Baggage was talking in regards to the spending of the money and that, spend it liberally or whatever the case may be. Some of my concerns would be that we need to do our due diligence. Like how much is certain things costing us, and ultimately who pays for this? How is it financed, and what impact is this going to have? What kind of precedence is this going to set? I understand that ideas are great. However, it's also important for us as the Assembly and the administration to vet them and get answers to as many questions as possible to minimize and avoid unintended consequences. I mean, we just spent over $2 trillion associated with COVID-19, and really it was to protect the society, but the next generation is already inheriting a large amount of our debt to pay for this. So I just kind of want to make sure that the message is out there that yes, it's federal dollars, but taxpayers are going to be paying for it. And I just want to make sure that as a team that we realize that it could come back with bad consequences. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can give a quick comment, I think those are well-founded. When I was in the Senate, I was one of the deficit hawks, and we drove the deficit down from 1.2 trillion a year to about 400 billion. But there is no question, there's no time in the history of this country that is in modern history that recognizes the challenge. And the number they've already, and I think 2 trillion is a good number. I wish that's all they spent. They've spent already close to 3 trillion, and probably when completed will be closer to $5 trillion. And as the Federal Reserve recently noted, that if we're not careful and don't do the right kind of economy and pumping the economy, we will spend a lot more trying to save it from itself by fall, because they're worried that the fall, we haven't seen, I can only tell you some of the companies that we advise, we see some things that most people don't see yet, and there's some serious challenges coming. And but that point is well taken. The one thing, and I recognize, every dollar you do not take and obligate as a city, and is not utilized, then that money goes back to the federal government. So your point about it is federal tax dollars. Absolutely, I pay a lot in federal tax dollars myself, but that money is going to go back, and another state is going to take it. And these dollars are to help save this economy from itself, because it is in serious, and it's not just, and it's not a partisan issue. You talk to any Democrat or Republican, they'll tell you, and the Federal Reserve is not your most liberal group. They are very clear about what needs to be done in order to preserve the economic stability of this country. And so I would just encourage you to think about those dollars you're going to be getting and how to use them for the long-term gain of the city, and have the accountability, the due diligence as was just brought up, but making sure that you don't lose the opportunity to help your own community, because these dollars, as you know, at certain parts of the year, I think at the end of this year, will be expired, and they will go to someone else.
Thank you, Senator Begich. Are there any other questions for the senator? Give it another second just in case folks are typing.
I like this method.
It works fairly well.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see any other questions. Well, thank you so much, Senator, for taking the time to chat with us. And definitely I encourage folks, if you haven't looked at the work that the Alaska Economic Stabilization team produced, to do that. It's very insightful. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you guys very much. Have a great day and enjoy the upcoming weekend.
All right, so at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to any general questions that folks might have before we move on, or comments that folks might have based on the presentations today. While folks are thinking of some, so I just want to note that tomorrow we do have two meetings. They're going to be fairly lengthy. So the first one is the business roundtable. We're going to be hearing from a lot of different businesses, lending institutions, and economic groups that are going to provide us additional insight from what we've heard today. As well as after that, we will be hearing from a variety of housing institutions, realtors, housing construction groups to talk with us during the housing roundtable. So it should be two lengthy but hopefully informative discussions for us tomorrow. With that, Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a question for Alex Sliva, if he's still on the line. We've got numerous bonds that passed just recently, and so we've got the authority to issue those bonds later when needed. But I'm wondering how many of those projects that were passed are already designed and shovel ready. Do you have an idea?
This is Alex. I'll defer to Mr. Chris Schutte, who may have more of that information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assemblymember Peterson, can you please repeat the question? I didn't catch all of it.
Just wondering what number of the projects that were passed that were on the bonds earlier this year that might actually be shovel ready to be and could be put out to bid fairly soon.
Oh, good question through the chair, Assemblymember Peterson. So without having the benefit of having the capital program in front of me at the moment, I'm going to go off of memory, which is spotty at best. The capital programs for the various parks and recreation, the ARTSA road bonds, and then the newly created emergency access, secondary access road bonds. There's a mixture of both planning and design projects and actual construction projects. And within each of those various service areas or bonds, I think they are usually about, depending on the year, they're usually about 50-50, or this year, I'm going off of memory, I think it's closer to 60-40, with 60% of them being for construction this year. Any of the projects that are construction projects, in fact, even the planning and design projects, as soon as the bonds are passed, they do go forward through procurement, through purchasing, and get out on the street as quickly as possible for bid. So we have tried to keep the construction industry churning by getting these bid notices out as quickly as possible and reviewed and accepted. So sorry, I don't have the complete answer. I don't have my copy of the capital program in front of me, but that's sort of a rough estimation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. With that, I will adjourn this work session. Thanks, everyone.